All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see a number of you on Zoom for what is really an important conversation, both personally and Jewishly. Right? In Judaism, we'll have a chance to delve into this in a variety of ways, but Judaism always wants us to confront our mortality. I mean, in some ways, that's one of the overwhelming themes of the high holidays is, right? How are you going to behave? Because we only have a fixed amount of time on this earth. And in some ways, that's supposed to spur us to use the most of the days that we have. And also recognize that, death is an inevitable part of life. Everyone will be born and everyone will die. And it's not something that we're supposed to run away from, but it's something that we embrace. And, in fact, our mourning rituals may be some of the most amazing psychologically of anywhere in the world about how important it is for us to confront death in a really important way. So I'm going to stop talking for a little while and really turn it over to our two incredible panelists who will both share a few remarks first, and then a number of you have already sent in some questions that I have, but happy if you wish to put a question to me in the chat or in another way. Chat's probably the best, and we can get those asked of our panelists as well. So let me introduce both of our panelists. We have Michael B. Cohen, is an elder law attorney whose Dallas law practice focuses on the legal needs of the disabled and elderly, including estate and Medicaid and other public benefits. He is a frequent speaker on these topics. Mr. Cohen is a member of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys and is a past president of the Texas chapter of such organization. He is also past chair of the solo and small firms section and the probate, trust and estate section of the Dallas Bar Association. He is also past president of the Dallas chapter of the Society of Financial Service Professionals. And additionally, he is presently serving as vice chair on the board of the North Texas chapter of the Alzheimer's Association, the AGE, Council of the Senior Source, the board of directors of the Dallas chapter of the Society of Financial Service Professionals, the board of directors of the Legacy Midtown Park, and the president of the Elderly Communal Housing at Dallas. He is also in the State Bar's Unauthorized Practice of Law Committee for the Dallas region, and he has been accredited by the Veterans Administration to give legal advice regarding veterans benefits. Mr. Cohen is named one of the Texas's top-rated lawyers and assigned the highest rating by Martindale-Hubbell. Recently, he became an adjunct professor of law for Texas A&M University and was honored by being named in Marquis' Who's Who in Law, an honor given to the top 3% of all attorneys, judges, and legal professionals in the world. And based on an independent survey, he's been named by Texas Monthly as one of the best wealth managers in terms of client satisfaction. He graduated from University of Texas at Austin and from from SMU School of Law, and is a member of the honorary fraternity of Phi Beta Kappa. Joining him on our panel is our own Ron Nevelow, who's a licensed clinical social worker and certified dementia practitioner, who has been in mental health for 27 years. He has a private practice in North Dallas, seeing people from high school age all the way through senior citizens, and he's helped found Inspire, a mental health practice working in senior living communities, providing residents and professional supportive counseling for things like grief and a unique brain fitness program. Ron's father was the head of the Chevra Kadisha and committee and taught about death and dying at Shereth Israel. Ron learned from him how to support people in their grief and not to be afraid to talk about death. Ron's personal experience of losing both parents, as well as professional experience, has given him a greater understanding of preparing for end of life. I think you would agree that we have two incredibly talented individuals to share this afternoon with us and give us their perspective. And I want to thank both Hazak, Sisterhood, and Men's Club for putting together this afternoon's panel and our program. So I will pause for a moment and I will turn it over and I'll invite Michael Cohen to begin.
There we go. Well, thank you, Rabbi. Thank you for that very kind introduction. Thank you, Phil, and everybody else who's joining, because I do think this is an important conversation that most people probably don't have and probably don't want to, because we don't like to think, notwithstanding Judaism's view of death. You know, you think about the Lion King, and you think about the circle of life, and it's just kind of natural that death is part of life. But notwithstanding that, we know we don't want to think about it yet. So often we should have conversations to make it easier for our family as to what you want, not only if you should pass, but if you should become disabled. You should let your loved ones know, because really, in my mind, estate planning is not about protection necessarily of assets, which is what most people think. It's about protecting your family. Usually we will, a lot of times when I do these workshops, we tell a story. We say, if this was your family here and this was all your assets in my other hand, and if a gunman had a gun and said, okay, either you give me all your assets or your family gets it, what would you do? Well, you know, I hate to tell you, but I don't know if it's because all y'all are on mute or whatever. Y'all are pretty silent. You remind me of Jack Benny, because Jack Benny would say, well, let me think about it for a minute. But most people would protect their family. Most people would protect, maybe not this group, but most people. Anyway, so it's important to know what you want. The smoother the transition would be, the more you communicate on anything. So whether it's about what happens as far as burial, or what happens as far as the assets, or what happens if you should become disabled, it's all important. And because, you know, I say disabled because if you have turned 65, the studies show that 70% of those who have turned 65 will become disabled at some point in their lifetime. Yet we don't think about disability. Do we ask about all the different insurance policies like long-term care insurance? Is there enough income? Who's going to help take care of whomever? Who has the authority to act? Anyway, well, I'll leave it be at that, because I know there's a lot of questions and I want to make sure everybody's questions are asked. So I'll leave it to Ron.
Thank you very much, Michael, for that wonderful kind of introduction to get us started. And Ron, where are you? There you are. If I can invite Ron Nevelow to now, you know, share with us some of his thoughts, and certainly from his point of view in this care of this important topic.
Thank you, Rabbi. And Michael, thank you for joining us. After I heard your intro, I don't know that you ever go home. You're on like 50 boards. How do you do it? I have no idea. So, hi, everyone. Yeah, my thinking and being a part of this today is I want to be available to talk to you about the importance of how do you go about having a conversation with your parents, and what are you doing for yourself in thinking about your own mortality and communicating those needs and wants with your own kids, and what is your approach in talking to your parents or your kids. You know, one of the great things about Judaism that I was taught is we don't shy away from this conversation. It's a part of the life cycle, and there's nothing wrong with talking about it and surrounding ourselves with the people to support us as we move through the stages that we don't care to move through with our family members. So I like this opportunity. I think it's a great opportunity to start to talk about some of this and start to take a look at, you know, what we can do in our own lives and what's most important to us and how to go about doing it.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you. All right. Well, it's really the two of you. I get to just ask a few questions and hopefully facilitate a conversation. So let's start off, and I'll ask it to both of you. I'll ask the questions to both of you, or most of them to both of you, and sometimes you may feel that the other, you know, has more to say, or you can start. So I'll start with this one with Michael. If you want to be better educated on wills, power of attorneys, estate planning, and more, what are some of the best resources out there to begin for somebody preparing on those topics?
Well, you know, quite frankly, in this information age, I believe if you look on the internet, you'll probably find an awful lot of stuff that you would like to know about. However, I would warn people to make sure it's Texas information. I'm also a little bit concerned about people's reliance upon things like LegalZoom, which may be good in 50 sites, but there's could be different problems when you use some sort of forms. That's one of the biggest mistakes that people often make. But it's good information to at least know basics, but things are different from state to state. And so, of course, I probably should say that you should look at DallasElderLawyer.com because I write 4 articles a month. We've had top 10 blog by the state bar about 17 times so far. And also I do podcasts. So if you're any type of topic about estate planning, you can certainly look at our either our website or listen to our podcast from my radio show. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Ron? And from my end, even though I'm not a legal expert, I can tell you I had it really super easy because I have a brother, Ira, who is a licensed attorney and a practicing accountant and a specialist in estate planning. And so I just go to him. And so he tells me what to do. And I'm sure if he gets caught anywhere, he knows Michael well enough that he'll probably send me to Michael. So it works out really easily for me.
Great. Thank you. And the only thing I'll just add, and when we were talking about this, in preparing is, there's a variety of ages, on this Zoom call. But this type of conversation, and I'll ask this to both Ron and Michael, doesn't need to wait until somebody is in their senior years to prepare, right? When we first got married and had children, these were some of the conversations that we had and put some of this in legal terms. Can you say a word about, when should some of these things be put in place for people?
So let me jump in and when we should start talking about it, at least. I think we would love to think we don't need to talk about it until we're very old and our parents are very old. And the reality is all of our parents aren't going to live as long as we hope they do. And we may not live as long as we hope to do. That's just a reality of life. So the sooner we can start to think about what we want to do and how we want to do it and have these conversations, I think it's important because when someone's grieving, one of the last things they need is to have to start making a bunch of decisions they never thought they'd have to make. That the only reason they're making is because the people that passed away didn't tell them anything or didn't set things up. And that creates a lot of difficulties, not even from a legal perspective, which Michael can talk about, but from an emotional one. If I'm grieving and all of a sudden if a parent dies and they didn't set up funeral plans or how they even wanted their health in a hospital to be dealt with if they were struggling, and I have, as a family member, have to make a decision for them. I don't want that decision. I want to know what they want before we ever get to that point. So I think it's important when kids are old enough, when our children are old enough to make decisions, that we start helping clue them in to what we need from them and want from them.
Thank you.
I couldn't agree with you more. Quite frankly, and as far as even on estate planning, I had both my daughters when they turned 18, including one that just turned 18 last month, do their own estate planning documents because I thought it was important. But, you can't, in these COVID-19 days, you cannot tell what tomorrow brings. I guess you can't ever tell what tomorrow brings. So if you wait until somebody is infirm or I could just tell you about a story that happened this week where somebody was waiting and couldn't make up their decision as to what they were going to do. And in the meantime, unfortunately, they had a stroke. Now, we're not God. We cannot control what happens tomorrow. So obviously, when somebody is healthier, whether they be young or old, but particularly as we age, you're more likely to be disabled. And so the older we get, it becomes even more paramount. So I do agree that it should be at any age, but as we age, the likelihood of disability, I told you, was 70% once you're 65 years of age, that something's going to bad happen. We love to say that everything's going to be perfect in this world. My wife's grandmother, I always say, unfortunately, she died prematurely at 107 and a half. Now, I know we'd all like to think that we live to be 120 and in perfect health until the day we die. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way.
No, thank you. Thank you. So let me just pick up on that for one more moment before we maybe pivot to a different topic related to this. What do you see as the most common mistake when people begin or doing the estate planning process?
Well, for me, there's a lot of different mistakes that they make. The first and the most obvious is they don't do anything at all. I think the majority of Americans don't even have a will or a trust. And that's a big mistake. We had one this week where they just didn't want to do anything. A friend was the agent under a power of attorney. And unfortunately, the husband now has dementia. Of course, they had children from different marriages, and one child was disabled. Well, they did no planning, or at least no will. We think we could overcome some of these issues, but there's a lot of different problems. Daughter was on public benefits. Public benefits are means tested. They did a beneficiary designation. People don't know. They think if they have a will and a beneficiary designation that the will trumps, but it's the opposite. A beneficiary designation trumps a will. That's a big mistake. If you have a trust, the biggest mistake is they fail to fund the trust. That means they fail to retitle the assets into the name of the trust. They fail to keep things up to date. The tax laws change all the time. The Secure Act happened this past year, where about IRAs and the planning that you may have done to stretch IRAs over a longer period of time change. Will the laws change under President-elect Biden? We think so. So people don't do anything or don't stay current. If you just look at the estate tax exemption amount in year 2000, the average person doesn't do their will for every, let's say, 19 years. So if you go back 19 years ago when President Bush was president, the estate tax exemption was $600,000. Right now, it's $11,580,000, going up to $11,700,000 as of January 1st. Do you think that there's a change? Do you think that there's tax law changes? Anyway, as you could see, things change, laws change statewide, federally, and there's only one thing that's for sure, other than fact, death, and taxes, is that's the laws will change.
Yep, thank you. Ron, I want to give you the opportunity.
No, keep going. You're good.
Okay. I suspected, but I don't want to ever assume. So, Ron, when you've been working with individuals and they've lost a loved one, what are some of the best coping mechanisms in terms of emotional and support that you've seen or you tell your patients or clients that they should best utilize?
The thing that Judaism taught me is surround yourself with community. I mean, I think sitting Shiva is an unbelievable experience, a great support to surround yourself with all the people that care about you and want to take care of you, where you're not even supposed to really be taking care of yourself. They're supposed to be taking care of you. I think that's fabulous. My father, why I included that in my introduction, my father taught me about the importance of allowing people to talk about their loved ones and not getting them to talk, to share and get it out, to not hold the grief in. And then, of course, as a therapist, I totally agree with what he taught me. I think that's so important. I remember as a kid talking to a friend of mine's father, his father died while we were talking during a Shiva service, and it made my friend uncomfortable that I was doing it. But I think that's what they need to do. From a professional standpoint, what I can say is people need time to grieve, and holding it in is a really bad idea. The idea of, don't cry, be strong is really a terrible idea. The tears need to come, and in many ways they honor, the loss. When someone's that valuable, to you in your life, then when you don't have it anymore, it's that big of a loss, and it deserves to be honored with those tears. The other thing I'd say is give people time and space to grieve, because everyone grieves differently. What one person does and needs may not be the same as someone else. You know, what I might need might be really different than what Michael needs, let's say, for instance, because we're different people. So you just kind of find what someone needs and ask them what they need. And hopefully, if they're good at taking care of themselves, they'll be in tuned enough, self-aware enough to know what they need, and they'll let you know.
Thank you. Thank you. As you were talking, it made me reflect in rabbinical school when we had, courses on dealing with, different stages of life. One of the common refrains we hear in a number of other religions is, the individual is in a better place after death. And in Judaism, we actually don't speak like that, right? And some, very much like you were talking around, right? Like we should be on earth and we should be living here, as long as Michael said, as long to 120 and in good health, but that's not possible. So we need to make the best of the days we have. And when that day comes that, the end of our life, we've reached the end of our life, we do grieve it, right? It's something terrible, right? And hopefully we've lived such a wonderful life that people do mourn for us.
And the circumstances change things too. How someone died, what age they were when they died. The death of a elderly parent is different than the death of a young child, or the death of someone that passed gracefully as opposed to someone that from a prolonged disease that was very painful for them is different. And then, the idea of at least they're in a better place. Some people might like hearing that, particularly based on the situation, and some people don't want to hear that. It's really about what does the person need, and hopefully they're able to communicate that.
Great, thank you. Michael?
Well, that's why I think that to make things easier for people and why this is such a pertinent topic, is to communicate what those goals might be. Whether it's sometimes people even have personal either care plans during their life or have instructions at your death. We had somebody in this week who had a funeral directions. Well, and actually somebody else that had a personal care plan. She said, okay, so this is something separate than like a medical power of attorney and things like that. She said, okay, I want to stay at home as long as possible if I should need care. I don't want to have to go to a nursing home. If anything bad happens to me, I would like to stay with my children. However, if it's a problem with their spouses, then I don't want to create any kind of problem. And if I do have to go to a facility, I don't want to be 5-star shaped because I'm fearful that the caregivers will all be congregating in the middle. And when I die, I want to be buried with my boots on in my white satin dress and on my tombstone say, wind beneath my wings. So some people get very detailed. I had another person who he said, okay, I'm going to have a wake. And at my wake, I want these people to speak. And then after that, I want these gospel singers. I'm going to be buried in my Under Armour sweats under a live oak tree. They're going to sing Amazing Grace. But they're not to be paid more than X amount. I mean, you can get as detailed as you want. And as funny as that may sound, it gives a direction, whether it be being for care during life or after death, which makes it easier so that you could deal with the grieving process, which I do agree, that Judaism, whoever did everything a long, long time ago, did it really, really thought about it. Because, I lost my father when I was a teenager, and it was a difficult thing. It still hurts me to this day. But the process, it does make it easier. It does make it easier. And you do feel like a part of a community. And I think that's really important. So whether there's communication is not only with the community, but also with your family, that's extremely important.
And when you're talking about that, Michael, what I was thinking about is, You know, if I have an idea of how I want things to go, if I don't communicate to someone that's going to live beyond my time, they're not going to be able to put that into action. You know, so it really is about finding out, you know, because some people don't care.
Yeah.
You know, my father had very little interest in any of it. He really did. And, but other people want to. I had a friend of mine that was dying from cancer, and he had to wait before he ever died because he wanted to hear what people had to say about him. And I thought that was great because I wanted to be able to tell him instead of everyone that loved him when he was gone. I thought it was a great idea.
Great. Well, both of you mentioned really where I wanted to turn for a few moments. And that's, you know, all right, so we realize we need to do this stuff. And, you know, but how do we begin to have those conversations with our loved ones, right? We don't want to ever think about, you know, our parents or our children or spouses, whoever it may be, not being with us for the rest of our life. So, you know, that sometimes gets in the way of having these conversations, even though we may in our heart know they're important. So how do you begin to start the conversation with whoever it may be to cover some of these important topics?
So, Michael, I'll jump in. I think it starts with what's your goal? What is it that you want to do? And what is it that you want to achieve? And then whatever fear you have in having the conversation, you need to face it ahead of time, because one of the problems is you don't want to just dump it on somebody. You know, you're together for a nice meal, you know, pass the potatoes and mom, dad, you know, do you have a will? You don't do it that way, right? You want to set up a time to talk. That if you're really nervous going into there, your intention may not come across. You know, for some people, the fear is, like if I'm talking to my parents, will my parents think this is all about me wanting their money ahead of time? You know, when that's maybe have nothing to do with it at all. So you got to decide what is your purpose in having a conversation that you, whoever it is you're wanting to have it with, and what fears do you have going in? Because if you can deal with that ahead of time, so you're going in a very balanced, emotionally confident state, it's more likely it's going to go across. And I don't mean just people my generation to our parents. It's me having a conversation with my kids who may not want to hear me talking about my death, because I don't plan on going anywhere anytime soon anyway, but it's probably a good idea for me to have a conversation with my kids too.
I might add, first of all, Ron, rumors of your death have been greatly exaggerated.
Thank you.
I would like to say, because it is a difficult thing, and I think that's part of the reason, besides fear, it's not something that's very comfortable. We don't want to think about death a lot of times. And we don't want to have uncomfortable conversations. So a lot of times we're the ostrich with our head buried in the sand. So I think if as far as the child talking to the parent and not saying, okay, about money and things like that or inheritance, I think you approach it like, mom or dad, I need help. I need help. Can you help me? I don't want to see what happened. You know how it happened with grandma and how we had to do all these different things. Please help me. I want to make sure I do things the way you would like them to be done. The only way I could do that is if you communicate with me to tell me what it is, whether you should become disabled or pass. I want to make sure that your wishes are followed. Please help me.
And it's not just parents or kids. Are we having these conversations with our spouses? For instance, if God forbid something happens to one of us and they're in the hospital and the question is, do you leave them on life support or do you pull the plug? Have you had this conversation with your spouse or your loved ones to know that you'll be doing what they want or they'll do for you what you would want in that situation? I think that's an important conversation to have too.
Yeah, everybody should have, well, I think a living will, and a lot of times people even go with these COVID days. Do I want to be on a respirator or not? And by the way, usually you see it more in Orthodox Judaism. There are Jewish living wills. Of course, it tells how, about being buried quickly, et cetera, et cetera. And there, by the way, there's also Jehovah's Witness living wills, and there's Catholic living wills. I got to tell you a story. I had a guy that came in to my office with his priest. I'm not making this up. He came in with his priest, and I told him, I said, there are, besides statutory language and different things you could add, but there are Jehovah's Witness living wills. There's, spinning of the blood, Jewish living wills, and there are Catholic living wills. And he said, there's a Catholic living will? Can you run one off and read it to me? And so I said, okay, sure. With seeing his priest there, and I looked at it and said, okay, it's very important to me that that I believe in the sanctity of life, and I want to follow the holy sacraments, et cetera, et cetera. But most importantly, I would like to inflict upon my heirs as much guilt as humanly possible. And I told him it was in a Jewish living will as well. The priest liked it, told me a couple priest rabbi jokes, and we went on.
Beautiful, funny. Well, good. So I appreciate both of you, and your perspectives on this. I have one final question for here before I want to pause for a moment and, make sure to take any questions from, those who are with us on Zoom right now. This was asked of us, Michael, is it a bad idea to keep a will in a safety deposit box? And if so, where should you keep those documents, and who should have the copies of them?
Yeah, usually it's better to keep it in a safe as opposed to a safe deposit box. Now, the reason for that is the problem is that a lot of people don't have other people on their signature card. Okay, so let me just tell you a story, and this is an actual case, where, of course, there was a husband, wife, had children from different marriages, and they kept, the deceased kept their will in a safe deposit box, safe deposit box. But it was the original, and when you probate a will, you need to probate the original, but he didn't have his daughter, who was named as the executor, on the safe deposit box. So the bank said, well, you'll have to get a court order to drill the box. Now, luckily, there's another exception under the rules where if you have a copy and the bank is watching you while they open it up and see if it's the same will, then they could give you the original will or give it directly to the court. But the problem is that you have, so the biggest problem is the signature card. Not to mention that it might not be open on weekends and things like that, and the accessibility, or somebody may be someplace else, or you may have to have a key. But so the biggest problem is people failing to put that person's name on the signature card.
Thank you. So, and who should have a copy of an executed will?
Well, the executor for sure, because the executor should have access to the original will, because it's the executor. The executor is the one who has the duty to fulfill the terms of the will. And of course, you have to have the original will, as I said, for probate. Now, you can probate a copy, but it's presumed to be destroyed. But anyway, that's a different story. And quite frankly, anybody that you feel like maybe an alternate executor, a lot of times people give it to their family members who might may want to see a copy of it, but sometimes people don't want to do that. For sure, your executor. A lot of times people give it to their family members just because they want them to see what's happening, and they want them to have no surprises. But that's also an issue. A lot of times why it's important to have communication. I know we had a case where the father wanted to cut out his daughter. There was 4 children. And I said, well, you want to communicate that with her? And he said, no. I said, really, especially knowing what you're telling me, I think you're asking for a will contest. Quite frankly, so if you want to reduce risk, you should communicate with those people that you're, and maybe you'll tell them why. Oh, I provided for you during my lifetime. I gave you X and Y, and this is why. Or I felt like you were more provided for in life. You are well-to-do. This person has a special needs. They're disabled. They may need more money. And at least communicate, because the more communication, the better. So I think it's good that others have copies, but certainly the executor needs to have a copy.
Great. Thank you. All right. So I have a question that came through from Andrew Silver, and I think I'm going to ask it to both of you, but in slightly different terms. What? No, Ron, I do want to ask you, because I want to start with you, and then I can turn to Michael to certainly speak about the legal parts of this. But actually, as I read it the first time, Ron, why is it important for a family to have a will and I'm going to extend that to power of attorney and some of those end of life conversations, not so much necessarily, I guess it does extend to the, money pieces as well. But what happens to families that you've seen, that haven't had the communication, don't have this in writing after somebody's death? What really, you mentioned earlier the emotional impact, of grieving, but what do you see happening? And then I'll turn that same question to Michael and certainly talk about some of the legal pieces, of that as well.
Well, after the death, Michael's going to have that experience. I'll be honest with you. I don't. That's the legal stuff that goes on. But what I'll tell you about the value of it beforehand, particularly when you're talking about power of attorney, is when you get a parent who starts having cognitive health issues, brain health issues, and is not safe to make their own decisions. If you wait too long, you're going to have difficulty getting that power of attorney from them. And then the fear is, if you don't have it, then they're going to start making decisions that are going to compromise their own financial independence. People are going to take advantage of them. The reality is seniors are a real easy mark for scammers. Happens all the time. And particularly when someone's experiencing dementia, or even a more severe case of mild cognitive impairment, they may start making decisions that they would never have normally made if their brain was in good shape. So having a power of attorney, when you have someone that is trustworthy, can protect you in that regards. Great. Michael, jumping over to you.
Yeah, I'm going to first of all say a little bit about these things, because there's so much to it, but I'm going to try to keep my comments as brief as I can. First of all, let me explain what I think you're referring to is the financial durable power of attorney. Durable means it's good during disability. Powers of attorney, by the way, terminate at death. A lot of people are not aware of that. Now, just because you give somebody a financial power of attorney doesn't mean that you stop your own power to act. It just gives somebody else the ability to act as well, unless there's guardianship, which is something that we would prefer to avoid. Now, if it's just dealing with the assets, I should tell you also, there's not just one power of attorney in the world. In fact, even if you use a statutory durable power of attorney, so the state legislature has language that they say is okay, but we often have to utilize different things inside and there's additional hot powers, like the ability to create a trust, the ability to do transfer planning, the ability to change beneficiaries, the ability to delegate to somebody else if that person couldn't act. There's lots of extra stuff that you could do. This is why it's so dang important to not use some sort of form. And that's why I'm very concerned about when I see these things on the internet, that a lot of times people fail to recognize the different issues. But it is very important to avoid people are going to take advantage of those who are easy prey, like wildebeest on the Serengeti plain. And so I feel like that I don't even like answering my back line or my cell phone, because there's so many scam calls this week, Social Security, everybody's, I don't like answering the phones. It's just because there's so many scams out there. Oh yeah, Social Security is going to call me on a recording. Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, so one of the other documents you could have, by the way, is a declaration of guardian, the ventilator encompasses or need, if there is a need for guardianship, if there's a dispute amongst family members. So it's that is a little bitty form document. If you're concerned about somebody taking advantage and getting a new power of attorney, which we see happen all the time, where they say, oh, I'm going to get a new power of attorney, I've got a new one, and somebody has somewhat diminished capacity. Of course, we won't even have somebody sign a power of attorney if it's a questionable capacity without a doctor's affidavit or somebody who's licensed who could make that evaluation, because there's too much abuse. If you're worried about somebody getting a new power of attorney and things like that, you put your assets in a trust and fund the trust. The biggest mistake that people make is failing to fund trust. So if you have the assets in a trust, though, even if somebody tried to take advantage of somebody with their assets with a new power of attorney, if the assets are in the trust, it won't make any difference. Of course, a lot of times there's going to be things you don't put in a trust, like a retirement account, because then it'd be a taxable event. Well, in any event, a power of attorney may be the most important document of all. In fact, if you were to make, as far as capacity, there's the different levels of capacity under the legal world. There's contractual capacity, gifting, donative capacity, gifting, as well as testamentary capacity, different legal terminology. And actually, donative capacity is the highest level of capacity, because we don't want people to have their assets taken from them during their lifetime. So even greater than having the capacity for a will is donative capacity. So we usually have an evaluation done. Is there sufficient capacity? And then we kind of put the different things in there when you do have a financial power of attorney. Of course, you should have a medical power of attorney as well.
So Michael, Michael, I'm going to jump back over because I read Andrew's question. But he's interested in knowing, which I have no idea, he's from a legal perspective, he's interested in knowing is why have a will if on your death, your assets would transfer over to your spouse, or in the case of both spouses, they would transfer over to your children. Why do you have to put that in a will? And I know you're chomping at the bit to answer that one, so go for it.
Thank you, Ron. That's where I was going next.
Yeah, that's really, people presume that, but that's not actually true. And now it could be true, but it's not, especially with second marriages. Okay, so let's say you have a home. You have a home together. And let's say a husband has a child from a prior relationship. Husband and wife buy the home together. Under law, and you have a will that says everything to my spouse, but you don't probate the will. What happens? Oh, that property, if husband died, his child or children from a prior marriage would take a portion of the interest in that home. So the premise is invalid. Because
you're going with the complicated version. Go with the simple version.
Well,
single wife, only one marriage, only kids.
Well, okay. All right. So, first of all, if there's only one wife or only one marriage, only one kid, yes, you could. But one thing you have to be able to transfer, a title company wants to make sure that interest goes to the surviving spouse and that there are no debts. Remember, they're going to have liability when they issue the title policy on that home. So they want what's called an affidavit of heirship, HEIRSHIP, heirship. Now, will they insure immediately? Many title companies won't for a year or two. Why? Because they're fearful of creditors coming out of the woodworks. So they won't even insure many times immediately. So if you want that spouse, surviving spouse, even if it was a one marriage and one child or children of the same marriage, then they may need to probate immediately if they wanted to sell the house immediately, unless you could get a title company to ensure that you taking the risk that there are no debts. And they're going to want an affidavit swearing, confirmed by at least two other witnesses that are not going to be non-disinterested witnesses, non-interested witnesses, disinterested witnesses, that is, that they, if they're willing to sign the affidavit. But we're seeing the trend of title companies making you wait a year or two before they will issue good title because they're concerned about creditors. So as a matter of law, that may be correct, but the reality is in the world, what will people insure against? It's like a bank. Will they make a loan to you? Well, only if you have good enough credit.
And from an emotional standpoint, point I've already made is when someone's grieving, the less they have to do that isn't about their grieving, the better for them, so they can get their grief out and move forward. Because what happens so often is people get stuck in their grief, or they don't take the time to grieve. Why wouldn't you take the time to grieve? Because I have to get this form, and I have to handle that matter, and this legal thing, and that legal thing, and I got to make this decision. That you don't want that. If you can take that off the table, off your surviving family members, you want to handle it ahead of time. Just be done with it, so they don't have to deal with it, and they can just grieve your loss and celebrate your life.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
No, Ron, you're 100% right. I mean, and certainly in these matters, you know, that you're talking about, you know, the legal aspects that both you and Michael are talking about. And I'll just put it in the rabbinic for a moment. You know, a couple months ago, I was dealing with a family who had to make all of these really difficult decisions in the hour, not about the legal piece, but about how to bury someone and how to find them a proper cemetery, because none of these conversations took place in advance. The person had moved later in their life, and none of these things were ever discussed. And, you know, here the person passed away, you know, late in the morning, and in the middle of the afternoon, we're not talking about, you know, funeral arrangements or, you know, proper shiva or anything. We're talking about where can we find this place to be able to be buried? Because there was cost issues, all sorts of things that just really made it complicated. And Ron, you know, this family really struggled with that type of reality for sure. One more question came in to me. Michael, can you discuss, you know, so somebody has a will, but what specific events could trigger someone needing, I know you said you should review it. I think you said the average person doesn't review their will for 19 years or something. But what specific events should trigger someone to revise their will, you know, throughout their life?
Well, first of all, the older we get, the more often we should review it. And I don't recommend that you wait 19 years. You know, at this point, we even have a maintenance program for people if they want to have the will reviewed. So right now, anybody who had a retirement account and named a child as a beneficiary, and we thought about stretching that IRA over life expectancy, and we had trust done to protect them from creditors or bad marriages or spouses remarrying, we have to rethink that just since earlier this year, because the tax laws have changed. And, you know, other things, of course, the normal things happen is, oh, somebody gets divorced, or maybe there's sometimes the life cycle events, maybe there's children, maybe a lot of times people make the mistake of only naming certain children as beneficiaries, and then there's an additional child, like Kobe Bryant did that earlier this year. He had a trust, but he failed to name the youngest one. So he had to go to court to modify the trust just to name for the younger child, the one that was born within the past year, for it to go that share going to the youngest child as well. So life cycle events, divorce, it could be addictions, all the bad things in life, creditor issues, somebody becomes disabled, marital issues, spouses remarrying. It could be usually life cycle events, but it also could be tax laws. So it should be reviewed more often than people realize. And, you know, will laws change again this year? Will there be a change in the capital gains tax laws for some people? Will there be a change in the estate tax laws for some people? Will there be a loss of step up in basis? Will that affect you? Will there be, you know, so there's lots of different things that we're even talking about, I talk with clients about right now. Right now, some people who had more wealth-to-do people may have a spousal lifetime access trust to take advantage because they think that the law is going to change on estate tax. Things change all the time. And to think that, you know, if you had something from that year 2000, the privacy laws changed. So it could be, does everybody have a universal HIPAA, the ability to have access for medical records during lifetime or at death if you're disabled or you die and you wanted to find out what's going on with the hospital? Usually the answer is that it's when it's life cycle events, but laws change. And so it should be more often than you realize.
I'm going to add, what should not trigger you re-looking at it is a falling out with a family member. Because what you're going to do is you're going to take family dynamics that are over a small period of time, most likely. And then when you start shifting your future decisions based on that, it's going to get really crazy, and it's not worth it because you don't want to take that to the grave. You just don't.
Well, you know, it's funny you should mention that because sometimes you do get things like that. We had somebody that said, I think I'm going to disinherit one child because we have disagreements on this election.
Yeah, and what it does is the disagreement and the hurt feelings don't stop when the person dies, but the person who dies doesn't have to deal with it. That's a gift, which I don't ever want to have, that gets passed on to their children, and the conflict continues, and it just creates for more conflict, which is really a sad commentary on what's happening there.
Right. That's why communication is so very, very important, and maybe things could be worked out with communications as to why you feel the way you do, and maybe there'll be at least a better understanding. There's dialogue, just like anything in life.
Thank you. I see the time. We're nearing close to an hour. So I want to does anyone have any additional questions, anything that they haven't had a chance to ask to our panelists? Okay. Well, with that, I thank you both so much for joining us this afternoon. And for Hazak and Men's Club and Sisterhood, again, for putting together this really important topic and really two exquisite individuals to serve as our panelists. So I know both of you could be available if anyone has additional questions to contact you in the future privately. Certainly I'm happy to speak as well to anyone. Can't speak on the legal aspects at all, so don't ask me any of those.
I can't either.
Halakhic law.
Halakhic law I can handle. You want to talk about, but unfortunately, halakhic law doesn't stand any have any chance in our American legal system. So don't.
Okay, so here's the split. If it's halakhic law, it's Rabbi. If it's the real law that we've been talking about, it's Michael. And if it's pickleball, then it's me.
Beautiful, beautiful. No, but seriously, this is, as I started it, and both Michael and Ron said this, perhaps more than anything else, right? The legal stuff, there's attorneys to make sure that gets worked out. But in order for all of those things to even begin to get worked out, we must find ourselves having these conversations, both with ourselves and then, to work up, as Ron said, the courage and the ability to have the conversation. And we have to lower the bar of being willing to discuss this both with our parents and our spouses and our children, because the more that we talk about what we want to happen to us after we die, to our assets after we die, to set the next of kin up in some ways, for really the best possibility to mourn, as Ron mentioned, as well as not having to deal with the legal stuff, of the disputes that can happen. And we've all heard stories or know stories of how that gets tied down for so long and just really makes the process so difficult for everyone. So please, I think the most important thing from this conversation is begin to make sure you're having those conversations in both directions, right? If it's you having it with somebody else, and if somebody comes and wants to talk to you about that, don't jump down their throat that all they're asking for is to get you out of the picture, that it's really a way to make everyone else thrive even better.
And I'm going to add something to that too. If you don't think you can do that, or if that's becoming difficult to have that conversation, bring in someone that's not a part of your family as an intermediary to help you have that conversation. There are people out there. I can be one of those people, or I can connect you with people to help you with it.
Thank you. Once again, thank you to both Men's Club, Sisterhood, and Hazak for really a special afternoon and organizing this great panel. So have a great afternoon, everyone. If you're still available in about 2 hours, 6:15, we'll daven Mariv this evening, but hope everyone has a good afternoon.